I grew up in a house that was built in the early 1800s. During the 15 or so years that I lived there, I saw some weird things, including floating orbs in the bathtub, decaying figures looming over my bed in the middle of the night, and cackling voices whenever I'd walk past a certain spot in the backyard. These phenomena always made me fascinated in things that can't be explained, but I never thought to seek any actual information about this stuff. So I thought it could be interesting to speak with a pastor about the spiritual aspects of what we know as paranormal activity. Pastor Kraft is somebody that I greatly respect because he really digs into the biblical truth of things that a lot of normal Christian culture doesn't like to talk about. So I'm very grateful that he agreed to answer a few questions that I've been thinking about. All right, well, I'd kind of like to just start off with a really broad question. So what comes to mind when you hear the terms ghost or paranormal activity?
Yeah, I think about when I hear things like that, it just reminds me of the reality of the spiritual world. Our worldview as Americans especially tends to be pretty limited to the physical, what we can, touch. And I think that's just overall kind of a scientific worldview. And a lot of times we don't think of the world in terms of having a spiritual realm, but the Bible is very clear that there is a spiritual realm. And so when I hear something about a haunted house or paranormal, to me it fits into that category, a mysterious, somewhat mysterious category, but a category of a spirit realm that we can't see and that can't be scientifically tested, but is very real.
Yeah, so how do you think that spiritual stuff can interact with our physical world?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that is the question is how do those things interact? So if there is a realm, and I do believe there is, of demons and angels and other kinds of spirit beings, spirit things, I do believe they can sometimes intersect with our physical world. But I don't know what exactly that metaphysically that means. Is this, if something is seen in the physical realm, does it mean it suddenly has physical properties? I don't know. There's a huge mystery, I think, to that whole realm of the physical and the spiritual interacting.
So have you ever personally experienced what's commonly referred to as paranormal activity?
What I've experienced is probably not in the ghost category. I have prayed through buildings and homes where people have experienced, those types of, door slamming or actually seeing a figure walking around. When I was there to pray, none of that manifested itself. So I've been in those contexts. And then apart from that, I don't know if this really fits in the category, but demonic manifestations, yes, I have experienced people who were being influenced by a demonic presence, and all the kind of ramifications of that sort of an experience.
Yeah, kind of on that topic, so like kind of what our mainstream culture would define as a ghost, figures in hallways and, door slamming, all that stuff. What do you think that is? Is that the spirit of a dead person or some sort of demonic manifestation?
I used to be totally every ghost is a demon kind of a thing. But the more I've studied this and read and looked at scripture through maybe a little different eyes, I feel like the answer would be, I don't think there's one answer to that question. So I think there could be demons that are sort of manifesting as ghosts for some purpose to frighten a family or to do something like that. But I don't necessarily believe that all ghosts are demons. There are so many scriptures when you look at this issue from scripture where Jesus talked about In Luke 24, when after his resurrection, they thought he was a ghost, and he was saying, "I'm not a ghost." And then he doesn't say, "and don't believe in ghosts." He acknowledges they could have thought he was a ghost, but then he said, "Ghosts don't have flesh and blood like I do." So he was differentiating himself from a ghost. He wasn't saying ghosts are demonic. And so there are several examples like that in Scripture where ghosts, they're mentioned as a part of, people thought he was a ghost when he was walking on water. You have the whole transfiguration thing where Moses and Elijah show up on the mountain. Jesus is there in physical form. Moses and Elijah, they're recognizable. Clearly, they died, right? So what is that? What category do we use for that? And so I think there's a possibility that God could allow a deceased person to come back in some form to communicate in a temporary manner. I don't think this is a usual kind of phenomenon. There's a story that I read in this book, Supernatural, by Chris Putman. He starts the book, early on in the book, telling the story about a woman and her 6-year-old son who were driving in California, and they basically were lost. So it was a missing persons kind of report. And she had a relative that was very concerned, was praying, and just had this kind of sense that something had happened to her, but that her son was still alive. And so there are all these elements to this story that have been on television, one of these paranormal shows. But the fascinating thing about this is that she went out, she took her husband out, and she was like, "We've got to go out. I think the son is still alive. We've got to go out." And so they were driving this highway that, again, she had just felt she needed to do. And as they were driving, they saw a naked woman on the side of the road. And so they stopped, and it ends up being the exact spot. When they stopped and they told the police about it, obviously nothing was there. They didn't see a real naked woman. But what ended up happening was that's exactly where it was, on the way to Lake Tahoe, so a heavily wooded area. That's exactly where the car drove off. And they found this little boy. Had it been delayed by 30 more minutes, he would have died. And so this Chris Putman interviews this boy and interviews all the people involved in this story. So to dismiss that, I think, would be, how can you just dismiss that? And to say it was demonic doesn't make sense. It makes more sense that God allowed the spirit of this woman, she died very soon after the accident, but the boy was still alive, that maybe God somehow allowed her in this spirit sort of form to provide an indication of where the crash happened so that her boy could be saved and rescued.
That's really cool.
Where do we put it? What category do we put that in?
Yeah.
And so I feel like, those kinds of things can happen. Are they the norm? Probably not. But that realm, we don't understand, a lot of it.
Yeah, I kind of feel like our human existence isn't really capable of even comprehending some of that stuff.
Exactly.
With it.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
All right, so to finish up, kind of the main goal of this whole project for us is to capture something that proves the existence of the spiritual world. Do you think that's even possible? Do you think it's possible to film one of these experiences that people see?
I don't know, honestly. If a legitimate spirit or a ghost or something, if you actually were in a room and that was happening and you filmed it, I haven't watched any of these shows, so I don't know if they're actually showing these kinds of things. So I'm not going to say that couldn't happen. I know there are some videographers, there are some people who are doing movies on sort of the positive side, so showing like the finger of God at work in particular situations, right? Showing a demonic sort of, someone being free from a demonic spirit, or someone experiencing healing. That to me seems like a legitimate, thing to try to find evidence. Not easy to find, but try to find evidence for the good. the other side, obviously, there's a lot on television, in terms of television shows where they're really honing in on the paranormal without a Christian worldview. And that's where I think to focus on that in what you guys are doing, I think requires a great deal of discernment to making sure you're not violating some of the things that God mentions in Scripture. But at the same time, if perhaps the Lord would want to use you to open people's eyes to see the reality of some of these things. So I'm not saying it couldn't happen, shouldn't happen, but I would exercise a great deal of caution in terms of wading into that world.
Thanks for checking out my interview about the spiritual aspects of paranormal activity. I thought that was a really interesting conversation, and I'd like to extend a really special thanks to Pastor Allen for having that conversation with me. He had some pretty unique things to say. So thanks for watching. If you'd like to see the future of this series, where we actually go out and explore some of these haunted places and try to unravel the mysteries behind them, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There's going to be a lot more content coming. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.